Hi, this is a lesson on the Trail of Tears. I'll be reading this book. Chapter 1, The Cherokee Nation. In the early 1800s, Native American people known as the Cherokees lived in the southeast United States. But many European immigrants were arriving and had already arrived in America, and they wanted that land for themselves. Between 1830 and 1839, the Cherokee people were forced to leave their homelands. The U.S. government moved them west to Oklahoma. The journey was long and hard. Thousands of Cherokees died on that trail. The Cherokees called this journey Alanaduna Dlo Ilui. In Cherokee, this means the trail where they cried. The Cherokees of the Southwest. The first written records of the Cherokee date to 1540. European settlers wrote about the native people of America. However, the Cherokee had lived there long before. The Cherokees survived on what they could find in nature. The men hunted and fished, and they used every part of the animals. Deer provided meat for food, but also leather for blankets and clothing. People used animal bones or antlers to make tools, and sinews were used for thread, to sew and weave. Some items, such as teeth and feathers, could not be used in practical ways, so the Cherokee used them in decorations or for religious ceremonies. The Cherokee women grew the crops, which included corn, beans, and squash. They wove river canes, a bamboo-like plant, into baskets and mats. Farming was a very important part of the Cherokee lifestyle. Likely they began farming as early as 3000 BCE. Women who harvested wild plants learned how to take the seeds from these plants and grow them. And that made them very dependable, so people did not have to travel all around throughout the year looking for new food. The women would also shape clay from the rivers into pots, and the women would fire the pots in their fireplaces, much like potters today use kilns. They collected herbs to use as medicine as well. Cherokee religious beliefs were rooted in nature. They believed that the Great Spirit created all the land, and they believed in many nature gods, gods of the mountains, the sun, fire, even individual plants. And they believed it was important to use only what was needed. Each year they would hold several religious ceremonies, and they celebrated growing seasons and other important events. One of the most significant was the green corn ceremony, and that celebrated the annual corn harvest. Other tribes lived nearby, including the Chickasaws, the Choctaws, and the Creek, along with the Seminole. These tribes didn't always get along. Sometimes they fought battles over land, but none of these battles caused as much destruction as the arrival of the Europeans. Chapter 2, Arrival of the Europeans. Spanish explorer Hernando de Soto arrived in America in 1540. This was the first meeting between the Cherokee and the Europeans. But centuries had passed before the Cherokee had regular encounters with the settlers. By the late 1600s, they began meeting and trading more with the Europeans, and this led to some unexpected problems. Diseases began spreading in the Cherokee communities. The most deadly was smallpox. Explorers from Europe unknowingly brought the smallpox, but it was devastating to the Cherokee. They had never experienced this disease before, and it meant their immune systems could not fight it. Approximately 7,000 to 10,000 Cherokees died from smallpox in the mid-1700s. That was nearly half of the Cherokee tribe. The Cherokees did not know how to handle this terrible disease. Their medicine men could not cure it. And what was even more frightening to them was the Europeans. It reduced the number of Cherokee, which meant more land, more Europeans coming in, and more settling. Smallpox was not the only problem. As more Europeans arrived, conflicts arose between them. The French and the British began claiming land in America, and both sides wanted the Cherokees to side with them. And for a while, some Cherokees would fight on one side, some Cherokee on the other. But by 1730, the Cherokees sent 7 representatives to England, and they made a formal alliance, and they agreed they would fight on behalf of the British. The Cherokees supported the British in the French and Indian War of 1754 to 1763. But during that war, the Cherokees faced much anger from the British colonists. The Cherokees and the British accused each other of betrayal, and this led to additional conflicts with the Cherokees. And the Cherokees lost many lives fighting that war. The British eventually defeated the French and took control of America. However, the Cherokee loyalty to the British soon caused even more problems. The war cost the British a great deal of money, so to pay off these debts, the British increased taxes on the colonies. The American colonists then revolted against the British, which led to the American Revolutionary War. And it was disastrous for the Cherokee. They again fought for the British, and they lost many tribe members. Entire villages were lost. When the British lost the war, the new nation of the United States controlled the east coast of America. So the Cherokee negotiated peace settlements in 1791 with the United States. Another agreement was made in 1798, and it cost them much of their land. European immigrants continued to arrive after the Revolutionary War. The Cherokees were repeatedly asked to give up their land. The U.S. Secretary of War, Henry Knox, saw that this might lead to another war. He argued that the Cherokees just needed to learn as the Europeans did. The Europeans wanted the Cherokees to give up their culture. The Cherokees were told they must wear European-style clothing and they had to learn English, even though they had their own language and their own alphabet. Now, some Cherokee were willing to make these changes. They had lost many family members in these wars, and they just thought learning these new skills and following this new religion would help them live in peace. But it did not stop the Europeans from taking their land, and the tensions continued. So this is part 1 of the Trail of Tears. We will have part 2 in a moment.